jumping in and finishing the front garden space. This has been a bunch of videos just to get around this little loop in the front garden. There are a lot of plants out here and a lot that were added year over year. Just this little space that I'm standing in front of has just a tremendous amount of diverse plants in it. We put the list of all the annuals that are in this annual border in the 2, 3, 4, like the 5th video in this series. You can get the whole list of annuals that are around these borders in the front garden with the paths running through them. They really look great. The Gomphrena in front of Steph here is breaking. We've allowed it to get a little bit too big without pruning it, so it needs, as we're finishing up these videos, we're doing a little bit of pruning on some things, but that one's got a broken branch in it, we're noticing, and everything's crowding itself just a bit in here. But the basil has really started to bloom, the purple basil there, and what great pollinator plants, and also just a great pop of color. So we're not really planting that for those flowers, although there are flowers on top of it, but that foliage looks fantastic. And to the right of that is another thing. The eggplants weren't really grown for those flowers, although those flowers are attractive. They were grown for those. The eggplants themselves are super decorative. The stems are black. The foliage gives you contrast to the other types of foliage that are in the bed. And I think Steph knocked it out of the park with the design of this combination. It's not, and the bees are absolutely thriving in it. The salvia that's in front of me is Mystic Spires. We had in the second video Misty over there, which is similar to this one, but this one's a little more vigorous. This one gets deadheaded. Steph does some deadheading on them, but it doesn't need it as much. It seems to really fill in on its own and branch really well. You can see the bees just absolutely go crazy for this particular salvia. This one is supposed to be hardy in our area. It's 3 small plants that we bought. A lot of the rest of what you're seeing in this bed was done from seed, inexpensively, but we had a couple holes near the end before the open house, went to Big Bloomers and bought a few small containers. That was 3 very small containers, and now the plants are 2 by 2 or something like that, and they've grown together. Other things in this bed, there's a container with a 2-ball topiary, Buxus sempervirens variegated boxwood, and some wave petunias that are planted in that container as well that you can see. The container's a bit crowded at this point, and so it's again, some things need to be cut off of it. So we're going to give this a little bit of shearing after we're done talking about it, and then it'll fill right back in later in the season. Beyond that, there's some balloon flowers, some cone flowers, some yarrow planted in here. There's a few perennials that are small back in here that will take some of this space next year. So we won't have to have as many annuals necessarily next year because perennials will take their place. There's one of these celosias that's come up everywhere. You're about to see some more of them in just a minute. And then there's a deutzia. This is the only, there's only a couple shrubs planted in this spot. This is a Deutzia scabra. It's not the most floriferous of the Deutzias for sure. I mean, it not the showiest flowering thing. It does flower, and it flowers for a while, but they're pretty small. Really growing this for this really nice variegated foliage. It holds up well in the sun out here. It's moved several times, so it's been one of the plants that we've abused over the last 3 years, but it's settled in nicely, looks pretty good in this space, has a little bit of structure to it. Where everything else is kind of a similar height in here. It's kind of, spiking up above everything else. And I think that wraps up this area. We'll jump over here and look at the other side of the porch foundation area. Over here on the other side of the porch, the last video we did the other side of the foundation over there, and this foundation area just became available to us because put new siding on the house, new framing around the windows, got the foundation cleaned up and painted. And so this bed, nothing had been done with it for all this. This whole project while we were doing other things to the house itself. This entire porch and roof and all of this was added. The concrete slab and the foundation for the porch was here, but it was just a little metal shed roof on it. So this was added, and now the space is available. So there is some open space still in here. We've always done a little annual border across the front of it though. And it's really, really showy, and Steph went for the Clown College kind of thing where it was really vibrant, showy colors. But we do have a couple celotias that are coming up from seed, volunteering in the garden, and they need a little bit of control. Some of them need to go, and a couple of them need some control, but these are coming up on their own. This one was in a flower, was in some flowers that Steph got that she came out and tossed here, and then they started coming up from seed, and it's a really nice one, and we've allowed it just to come up in the spaces that we want it to allow it to grow, but it's getting taller than everything else, and so they're going to need a little bit of control. The coleus here, really, really nice one with purple center, 3 colors. They're starting to bloom right now. Great for pollinators when they're in bloom, but they're not showy in bloom. It's really grown for that foliage. It's the foliage for the humans and small insignificant flowers for the pollinators. Then there's a combination of a couple zinnias that I will put up on the screen. All of these dwarf zinnias that are in this garden are just such great performers with basically zero maintenance. The other things that are in here will require a little bit of pruning. The zinnias require virtually nothing from us at all. There's a toothache plant in the front of the bed that's in that mix. All those interesting little yellow flowers on those. There's a Kufia that's in this blend as well, which you're not seeing a whole lot of because the coleus or the celosia is currently eating it. And then this gherkin, this Mexican gherkin cucumber, I would not recommend planting this ever. It was in the vegetable garden last year, produced virtually no usable vegetables whatsoever, but it produced a ton of seed, and that seed has migrated through the garden. And so we're regretting having planted that in the vegetable garden last year, but it's made it, there's one here in the vegetable, I mean, I don't know how that seed ended up here, but it did. And then we've got a few shrubs in here we'll talk about. With intent, we've planted a few fragrant things near the front door. So there's a couple of osmanthus on the front foundation. There's a sweet viburnum on the other side of the porch. And then on this side of the porch is a jubilation gardenia from the Southern Living Plant Collection. The annuals need to be cut off of it just a bit, as you can see. This one has the double white flowers, gets like 3 to 4 feet by 3 to 4 feet, has great foliage, and these tend to be ongoing blooming. So it blooms heavily for us in our area toward late May, and then it will continue to throw out some flowers the rest of the season. I can see a couple that were recent flowers, but right now it's in the process of doing some growing, and then right there I can see a flower bud in the process of forming right there. So that's how jubilation operates. It blooms heavily, then puts on some growth, and as it puts on growth the rest of the summer, each of those new pieces of, like 2 inches of growth will also produce flowers as well. Very, very fragrant double flowers. Again, this one will ultimately occupy about this much space, but tends to be, this is how we operate here. We fill space while we're waiting for something to grow and kind of fill into that space. But that's jubilation gardenia. This is an oriental thuja or oriental arborvitae. This one's called Frankie Boy. Typically you'll see this one sheared really, really tightly. And so it's like this really fine textured conifer. I kind of like this open look on it. But again, when I see this one available at retail and when I see it in some gardens, people will shear it really tight and it will fill in super, super tight. Probably a little bit more gold or chartreuse color on it if it was in a hair more sun, but it's not the most heat tolerant thing out here in the garden. So it's the house, this is getting a lot of sun on it, but the house does put this in the shade. The house is east facing. And so out in the middle of the garden on the east facing 1-story house, it stays sunny almost all day long. But up to right at the house by 1 o'clock or so, the shadow's being cast across this. And again, it's probably costing us a little color on it, but it's allowing us to grow it well. And I'm more growing it for this kind of fiber optic look it has to it than I am the gold color. We've been filming this over about a week at this point of doing these videos in the morning when the light's kind of right. She's had to go in the house most every morning, but we finally have a morning down in the 70s. Our mornings have been up around 80 degrees overnight, and so she's able to stay out here with us the whole filming of this one. But other ones I let her out here, she's in the film, and then she's into the house pretty quickly. Really love this Taxus baccata. This is a really beautiful yew. This variegation is so bright on it. It's gotten enough light on it that it's, you know, the variegation is in great shape. Taxus baccata can get big in time. The variegated one will definitely grow a little bit slower, but it'll fill up a big space here for sure. Saw them in Europe, quite big. Just a bright pop of color here. The thing, it's grown about, you know, 2 inches, you know, total growth since it went in the ground earlier this season. This is a plant that we've had in a container and moved about, and it's finally found its permanent home out here in the front garden. This is a plant that everyone's in pursuit of. This is Autumn Moonstruck Encore Azalea. This is the variegated Encore Azalea. It's in a kind of a tough neighborhood here. Where I'm standing versus where Steph is down on the driveway, it's about a 2.5 foot drop, and that spot is a bit dry. And we've been really dry this season. I think it's probably rooted in enough now that it's not going to have any issues. White flowering Encore Azalea, so it'll bloom spring and fall. Few flowers here or there during the summer as well, but really heavily in the fall, really heavily in the spring. And then look how tight and compact the habit is on this Autumn Moonstruck. We haven't done any pruning to that. You would think that I've been out here manicuring this thing to make it look like that, but I haven't at all. Just a great overall variegated azalea. I think the availability on it will be substantially better next spring. I think more and more of the growers are jumping in and growing it. I think, you know, again, I had some, you know, I was 20 years in the nursery business and looking for the perfect variegated azalea, and I would get them that would revert and all kinds of issues with them. But this thing is so stable and such a good looking plant that I think growers were a little slow to figure that out as well, but I think we'll see it everywhere pretty soon. It's just a great addition to the garden out here. It's getting lots and lots of sun. Encore azaleas are capable of taking a little more sun than our traditional azaleas. This is a Thuja occidentalis called Highlights. Really great pop of color. We moved it. It was right about where there was a retaining wall that went along here, a cinder block retaining wall. There were a few old azaleas back here. Took those out, did all the work on the house, and then slid, really scary, slid this Thuja back where we always thought it would end up. And it's in the perfect spot now. It can get as tall as it wants up here on the house, and we would like to get some height up on the front of the house here. But you see that pop of color, all the new growth in it has this really great chartreuse color. I was really nervous about moving larger conifers like this, especially late spring when I moved it, because if it taken any damage, it would be so slow to recover. Like if it, you know, decided to have shed half its, you know, half of its foliage, it would have been a long time recovering. But it is really like a champ, been perfectly fine. There's some variegated Solomon seal, and it was contained. A couple things on it. It was contained by the driveway and the retaining wall that was back here. Well, the retaining wall is now gone, so this Solomon seal is free to run where it wants to run. So it's going to need to, you either have to decide that you're going to control it every spring when it comes up and keep it in a smaller spot, or it's got to move somewhere else where we can contain it. These things that run like this, I'd rather have them somewhere where it's maybe drier than it would like. That can be a control, or it's, you know, or it needs to just absolutely be contained, or it could just be in a container. Anything that would contain it. But now it's going to run into this bed. The other problem with it is it's getting probably more sun than it would like. There was a maple here originally when we started this project, and that maple cast a shadow on it, took out this morning early day sun, and so now it's also burnt just a little bit. There's some one last thing in this front bed. There's some Goldstrom Rudbeckia we did from seed 2 years ago. The first year it went in the ground, the rabbits ate it to the ground every day. They just ate it and ate it and ate it and ate it. What they actually did for us was end up filling it in pretty well for us. This drought this season has killed a few of the pieces on it. There's like a 2 foot drop here where I'm standing, and it's really dry, and so they got dry after we finally had them looking pretty good. A couple of the pieces have died on it, I think, from, you know, it's just, if you dig down 3 inches here, it's just absolutely bone dry. But overall, there's, you know, the rabbit damage didn't completely destroy them and kind of made them slightly more full. Got a couple people asked recently the name of our Russian sage that's out here at the street. It's called Crazy Blue. It's really super compact. You know, I think some I read on a couple websites, it stays 18 inches. Well, it's going to get taller here in the South. We just have a longer season. I think Darwin Perennials says it gets 3 feet, and that's literally right where it is. So whatever their trialing was, they, you know, kind of knew how big it actually, you know, how big it actually gets in the garden. But it's occasionally Russian sage will flop in the garden if you just have the straight, you know, not one of the newer named ones. And we don't push this stuff a whole lot. There's not a whole lot of fertilizing going on out here during the season. So I'm not, you know, I'm also not like trying to demand it just grows and grows and grows, but it's heavily visited by the pollinators. Again, we try to do a combination out here of things that are really, really showy for, you know, the clown college design, combined with some things that are actually just the top pollinator plants. And this Russian sage would definitely be in that group of not as showy, although there's a lot of flowers on that, but certainly more visited by the pollinators. There is a fleabane that we got from a ram down here and just blooms and blooms and blooms. Some of those are annual, lots of them are perennial. I actually don't know which one this one actually is, but it's, you know, just blooms and blooms. There is a Verbena bonariensis beside it that has come up from seed. It's a non-native, but, you know, we see them in most perennial borders, and, you know, they're self-seeding and great. You know, it's one of those it just really, it doesn't take up a whole lot of space. It blooms a long time. That one is its first year from seed. It'll be fuller next year if we choose to allow it to continue to grow, but the goldfinches take those seeds later on. So pollinators pollinated, and then the birds can take advantage of it as well. There's some vinca that's a little smaller than what you've seen in these other tour videos because they were planted last second 3 or 4 weeks ago. So they'll fill in this as we go. And then there's one giant zinnia that came back from seed. We've had lots of giant zinnias out here over the last few years, and a few of them pop up from seed. And if it's in a spot where we don't mind it came back from seed, then, you know, roll with it. Most of the zinnias we have out here in the garden are the dwarfs, though, because they're just easy, much lower maintenance plants. And typically the giant ones will end up with mildew or something on them over the course of the season, and we end up having to pull them at some point. This hydrangea is white wetting. Maybe, you know, I'm talking about occasionally we've abused a few plants out here where we've moved them multiple times. This one got ripped out of the back garden one day, went in the ground out here, and then wasn't watered, and has probably only been watered just a few times. This side of the driveway just gets no overall love from us. But wow, this thing can hold up from that incredibly well. We're a little closer to this one being in peak color. You know, they start green and then get whiter and whiter and whiter. One of the things with white wetting is how big and tall these flowers are held up. So keep in mind, last night we got a rain, and so these are extremely wet this morning, and they have not been pulled over. Some of the younger growth down at the very bottom that it's not up to snuff yet. You know, it's just thin new growth on it, flopped over. But these rigid ones from last year, man, they're standing up big and tall. They don't flop at all. There's one sedum down in here, and Frosty Fire, is that the name?
Frosted.
Oh, Frosted Fire. The Frosted Fire sedum, which will bloom, should be a fall blooming sedum, but it wants to, it's trying to bloom right now, like so many fall blooming things are just all wanting to bloom early this year. One of the things you'll notice about the plants that were chosen for this area out here at the end, we knew we wouldn't be watering all that much. So, you know, you got the mellow yellow yucca. Yucca is definitely tolerant of being out here without any water. That hydrangea paniculata, the Russian sage, the sedum, a couple native perennials as well. You know, and then there's a solidago out here that the rabbit's been chewing on one side of it. It wants to actually bloom. All of our solidago basically are in bloom or about to bloom much earlier than they normally do. But that one's obviously a really compact one. We just got this and just put it in this spot. It's another plant we know will hold up out here in this heat if the rabbits will leave it alone long enough. A lot of times they'll just chew on something that first year when it's such young growth, but it doesn't do enough damage to them to hurt them. Actually ends up as a free pruning, bigger, better, fuller the next year because it got pruned a couple times. But it is annoying when it's happening for sure. We've barely shown this side of the driveway for the first 3 years of this project out here because it had just kind of been a dumping ground for a few things here or there. We had planted blueberries with intent, but a lot of the other things that went over here were just, it was so random. It was like the last place we were thinking about. But this bed's actually finally come together, and there's some things that look pretty good in it. There's a couple of things that need to just flat out be removed that have maybe gotten a little bit aggressive, and a couple of changes we'll make later on. But it's definitely better. This version is better than what we've done for the last 4 years for sure. Steph wanted these. We put in these gomphrena called Fireworks behind the fence, hoping that they would come up high enough to be seen from the fence. And a little further down, you'll see in just a minute, they have. This one little spot right here has not yet, but it will. We've had Tithonia here in the past, and the Mexican sunflowers, and they've gotten up about this tall, and the goldfinches have been on them and taken the seed. And don't know which we'll do next year. The gomphrena has all kinds of cool pollinators on it. Lots of interesting moths come to these gomphrena, and so, or maybe we'll just do both potentially next year. But I do like this Fireworks gomphrena, very different than the gomphrena that's over in the front border where they're slow and compact, they're really tight plants. This one is tall and wispy, and it's kind of interesting to have this one over here. This one right here is about 4 feet tall. Why not slide down here and show it off? I'm 6 foot tall, so this thing's it's on a little bit of a hill, so I'm gonna call it 4 feet tall at this point, and you can see it's doing exactly what she had intended, which it's coming back over the fence. And again, there's just a ton of cool pollinators on it. Really interesting plant. The foliage is in great shape on it. Hasn't been anything chewing on it. Seems to be really just kind of well adapted overall. Conifers, the story of conifers in this garden is they get 2 or 3 years in a container, and then they go to a spot probably that they're not going to end up in, and then they get moved again, and then they land in a spot where they're going to stay. And that's the story of this boulevard cypress, but it's still in great shape. It was in a container for over 2 years, which kept it from growing a whole lot. It's gone into this spot, which is a very highly amended area. We tend to get our wood chips and mulch delivered to the driveway here, and then when you get near the end and you're like, well, you ordered a little bit too much, what do we do with it? It ends up in this bed. So it's very highly amended soil. This boulevard cypress has really jumped up and taken off pretty quick. The 2 blueberries that are on the front of this particular fence panel are Bless Your Heart and Takes the Cake. These are 2 Southern Living Plant Collection blueberries. This was the second full year of growth, and they had lots of blueberries on them. There's still a few that have not matured. But we got a few handfuls off of them this year. I expect, as time goes on, there'll be more and more. These were University of Georgia breeding. We've got some Florida breeding, some from the Florida breeding program a little further up that we'll show you next. A few more things for this video. There's 2 more blueberries up here, and they're being eaten by some St. John's wort that really needs some tough love added to them. I love the St. John's wort. It gets the yellow flowers that the bees really, really love. It's a great, pretty low ground cover. Obviously, that's not a very, tight to the ground cover, but it works. Unfortunately, is doing a little too well in this, again, very highly amended space. So I think we're going to have to take it out, maybe grab a piece and transplant it someplace else that it may not be as aggressive potentially, and just kind of get that area back belonging to the blueberries with something else underplanting it for next year. But these were very early producing blueberries, and we got a lot of blueberries off of these. This is I Declare and Takes the Cake. I don't remember which one is which. These are very early flowering southern high bush varieties, and then the fruit was so quick to mature. We were eating these in May, which is unbelievable how fast these blueberries matured. Again, this Gomphrena, Fireworks Gomphrena, is coming up over the fence, which was the plan. It's actually currently eating a variegated oleander back here, which the oleander won't blink at it at all, but the oleander ultimately will end up pretty tall and narrow, and it has variegated foliage. Kind of a pinkish flower on this one, but really it almost doesn't need to flower. The foliage is so nice on this thing. I've seen it a few times. The one that I have is only this tall, so not showing off a whole lot back here right now, but when I've seen them larger down on the Gulf Coast, really great looking variegated oleander, super cold sensitive. So I'm hoping, if we got the wrong winter, our oleander could really be hurt bad all the way up here in Raleigh. Tends to be a little more toward Wilmington and then down into the south, where you'll see oleander out in open spaces where you don't have to worry about it. We may have to cover it for a winter or two. There's a Charlie Boy quarterline that we missed a little further back, and it's almost in holding. It's been a container plant the last couple of years. We didn't end up having a use for it, so it got stuck in the ground over there. Great looking plant, and it's been hardy for us. It's been outside for 3 years, right? I mean, it's been hardy for us. So interesting looking cordyline. I think that's it, except for this cryptomeria. We'll stop right here and pick up with the giant daylily in the next one. This cryptomeria is called Limeade. We have a lot of cryptomeria in this garden, and you'll see that as these videos unfold. We've had, not on this one because this one's been in the ground and unmoved, the cryptomeria that we moved around this season have not particularly liked this 100-degree temperatures and very dry conditions. We've got some damage on a couple of others that we moved at a very inopportune time, but the ones that have stayed in the ground have been tough as nails. But this one's called Limeade. There's only 1 or 2 of these over at the Ralston. I've never seen this plant anywhere except for the Ralston and in this garden. I got it at a rare plant auction a couple of years ago from there. It's a good looking variety. I don't know that this one's has the most ornamental quality of other, there's so many great cryptomeria, and you'll see that as these videos unfold. We have several more coming up in videos from this tall to, taller. And so this was just kind of a weird version, and the new growth on it is kind of a lime green color, and it's super interesting. And again, it's there's just not many of them, which kind of makes it interesting in my mind. And I have a story about it because I know where I got it from, which is, I think, always kind of fun to know where the plant came from. And we're going to pick up in the next video with this giant daylily, which was something that somebody gifted us on the road. So we like those kinds of stories in the video, so that will be up next. Thanks for following along with us.